Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and the topic of the conversation was kind of funny. Is if you don't change direction, you might end up where you're headed, right? Because some things need to remain constant. And I think in kind of the reverse way, the other side of the coin is that some things remain constant so that we don't have to adjust to them. Most reps will do their stuff at the beginning of the year at their national sales meeting, right? They'll listen to the new products that are being launched. They'll start to formulate some plans. And then about halfway through the year, they'll either be getting the results they're looking for, which means there isn't a ton that needs to be changed, or their manager will have a sit down with them and say, Will, you're lagging behind.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, the host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most downloaded B2B sales show. On today's episode, we have a legend. He's been on the show a bunch of times. I'm glad to have him back. We have Jeff Bajorek. He is the author of Rethink the Way You Sell When It Goes Sideways. And that's exactly what we're talking about on today's episode. Why you should periodically, maybe during or just after a world economic and global pandemic, you should reset things. You should have a moment to yourself. We're diving into that and how you go about it, the process, and a whole lot more. Everything that we talk about is available in the show notes over at salesman.org. And with that said, let's jump right into it. Jeff, welcome back again to the Salesman Podcast.
It is so good to be here. I feel like a winner. Every once in a while, I get an email from you, and hey, Jeff, downloads were really good on the last episode. Do you mind coming back again? I'm like, oh man, Will Barron chose me. Ooh,
if the downloads were terrible, we would not be having this conversation, Jeff. You'd be banished from my inbox. And I'll be kidding, of course. So on today's episode, we're going to get into how we can rethink the way we sell. And I think rethink is going to be a theme here and a topic as well. But before we get into all that, before we perhaps get into some tactics, before we get into how we can perhaps think more critically and all that good stuff, why, this seems like a stupid question to ask, but I think it's important. Why is it important that we do somewhat regularly rethink the way that we sell?
I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and the topic of the conversation was kind of funny. Is if you don't change direction, you might end up where you're headed. And it's kind of this old ancient proverb, right? But every once in a while, you have to assess your heading. Are you going in the right direction, right? Let's think about the year 2020 as an example. In the first quarter, mid to end of the first quarter, the world sort of woke up and noticed that things weren't going the way they thought they were supposed to from a public health standpoint. And that obviously had tremendous ramifications across every aspect of our society, business world, the personal world, everything. If you kept your same goals, given this new situation and all this new information, you were setting yourself up to fail. It didn't mean that you were going to. And there were some companies who did perfectly well along their target. There are some companies who actually thrived in that situation. But from a business standpoint, if you did not take into account new information, you were setting yourself up for calamity. And I think that sometimes it takes a global pandemic to teach you a lesson that you can apply at a much smaller, safer, healthier scale, right? Less dangerous scale. But I mean, why do companies have quarterly business reviews, right? Why do you get a new set of, a new quota in the beginning of your year, your fiscal year or the calendar year? Why do we have these checkpoints? Why do managers routinely meet with their reps on a weekly or monthly basis to, make sure that they guide the right behaviors and the right strategies? We need to take new information into account on a regular basis. And we need to consider, it's not enough to just say, okay, well, we have new information now. We have to, at this point, say, what does that information mean? And what do we need to adapt to?
Is the metaphor here perhaps that we're sprinting, we think we're going the right direction, and then to use a football analogy or metaphor, the goalposts change. So if you carry on doing what you're doing, you might have won the game 6 months ago, but now the game that you're playing, whether you like it or not, especially when we talk about the global changes that have happened with meetings being virtual and some industries doing well and some industries just dying a complete death, is the fact that we've got to appreciate that the game we're playing is fluid, and so the way we play it has to be fluid as well.
100%. And there's a reason that they don't move the goalposts on the field or on the pitch, rather, right? Because some things need to remain constant. Mm-hmm. And I think in kind of the reverse way. The other side of the coin is that some things remain constant so that we don't have to adjust to them, right? Because that means that we're all playing by the same rules. I think in a lot of ways, the fundamentals, the principles, the concepts that undermine or underlie rather successful selling, they never change. And we only get in trouble as salespeople when we think that those rules have changed, right? Like I did a piece, wrote a piece recently that, look, 2020 taught us that selling hasn't changed, right? People say, oh, COVID changed selling. No. Listen, driving doesn't change when you get a new car, right? The rules still apply. When you get a new car, maybe the way you drive changes just a little bit, right? But the fundamentals of the road, in the United Kingdom, you guys drive on the left side of the road. Here in the States, we drive on the right side. You get a new car, you get a real life version of that shiny model that you have on your desk in front of you there. Yeah, you're going to know how to drive. You're going to know what the rules are, but you're just going to have a different way of doing it, right? So certainly some of the techniques need to change, need to be amended. Those are the things the rules that we need to be flexible within. But the concepts, they always, some concepts, the fundamentals, they always stay the same. And so, we need to rethink the way our techniques evolve, adapt. We need to make sure that they're still effective. We need to have regular check-ins. We need to think about these things. But we can't get so carried away. We need to realize that the soccer pitch still has the same dimensions everywhere you go. You still play on natural turf everywhere you go. The goals are the same size, right? Some things do stay the same. We got to know the difference between what needs to adapt and what we need to mind.
So a couple of things here. First, on this podcast, it's called football because we invented it, right? And that's what it's called.
Fair enough.
And just a slight side note here, I found this absolutely fascinating. I was watching an interview with Mark Cuban a few weeks ago, and he was being interviewed by these esports or electronic like gamer nerds, right? And I used to play loads of competitive games when I was younger. I used to play Counter-Strike and Quake and all these games, so the audience, regular listeners will know this. And this interviewer was asking him, hey, you own a basketball team. I think he's got interests, financial interests in other professional sports teams as well. The woman was asking him, hey, why haven't you invested in a esports team? You're clearly into it. Mark Cuban is a nerd by the very definition of it and how he's run businesses and made his billions in the past. And he came up with, so I've never pondered on this, and I thought it was absolutely fascinating. He said he can't invest in a esports team because the rules can change. The developer of the game can add a new weapon, if it's a racing game, a new car. The meta, as he called it, can change at any moment. And so he doesn't feel like it's a good financial decision. So he's waiting on a game to be open sourced or to come with essentially contracts in place from a developer standpoint that nothing will change other than bug fixes for a fixed period of time so that you can build a team and build around it. That just came to mind as we were talking about goalposts and games changing there of perhaps that's how that's applicable in the business market as well.
That's really interesting because what you bring up there is the concept of what's the foundation upon which I'm building this, right? Like if you're going to just pull the rug out from underneath me at any given time, then I don't know if that's a safe investment. I don't know if that's a safe way that I want to go. And along the lines of, we talked about this before we started recording, these different social networks that are popping up and, well, getting a lot of attention. How long is that attention going to be there? Do I have the flexibility, the additional bandwidth to play around with something that might not pan out for me? Like I'm traditionally not a very early adopter. Right? I know when something conceptually makes sense and I can say, wow, I see the potential for that. But there are other, whether it's social media channels or platforms or, even live. I'm doing a lot more stuff live this year, but I never saw the value in going to Facebook Live or even LinkedIn Live right away because I never created anything that was for the present moment. I always created things that were meant to stand the test of time. What difference does it make when people find them? It's going to be just as good. The lesson's going to be just as solid, other than obviously playing the game with the algorithms to get in front of more people and get some attention. I see live as a novelty. Now that it seems to be there's a better foundation for it, and I see value in a different way. I'm pursuing those things a lot differently. So it's once something has been around long enough for you to be able to take some of the things for granted, right? To be able to trust that those things are going to be that way for quite some time, it makes sense. But yeah, that foundation, I think, is what a lot of people take for, or I don't want to say they take it for granted, it's what a lot of people overlook. They forget what the foundation is. They forget what the foundation of selling is. They forget what the foundations of their mindset and the proper mental mechanics to get yourself in the right frame to perform are, whether it's on the football pitch, or it is in the boardroom.
I think you're underestimating how people do take this for granted. And we see it on LinkedIn all the time of, I've been cold calling for the past 20 years. I'm going to continue to cold call. I've been cold emailing for the past 10 years. I'll continue to cold email. I've never created content. That's a marketer's job. I will continue not to make content. Some of these are more exaggerated than others, but I can see it in the LinkedIn community as I just go through the feed. But with this, let's get slightly more practical here for the audience, Jeff. And you can feel free to tell me off, because I know I do this incorrectly. I only really sit down and rethink the way I sell and do business and create products and training and the podcast and all this stuff once a year. Every December, I sit down and I start with the assumption that everything I'm doing might be wrong. It might have worked in the past. It might not work in the future. So I don't underestimate the fact that my assumptions are assumptions unless I've got real data points on them. But I only do it once a year. Is that adequate for a B2B salesperson, especially in the climate that we're selling in right now? Or do they need to do this quarterly, monthly, weekly? How often do we need to consciously rethink the way that we sell?
Consciously, I think quarterly is a really good cadence. And what you'll find is that, and I do the yearly thing as well, and what I find, I probably overthink it. You know what I mean? And not just because Rethink the way you sell is my trademark and my brand, but because, I'm so interested and curious, and I tinker a little bit with some things. But I think, when I go back to my B2B sales days, when I go back to those days when I was standing in operating rooms, much like you were, there really wasn't a whole lot that needed to be adjusted, right? So I think most reps will do their stuff at the beginning of the year at their national sales meeting, right? They'll listen to the new products that are being launched. They'll start to formulate some plans. And then about halfway through the year, they'll either be getting the results they're looking for, which means there isn't a ton that needs to be changed, or their manager will have a sit down with them and say, Will,
I've been there, Jeff. I did chill when you said that
then. So there are times when you're forced to. And then I think what the best reps do and always did was, at least in the company I work with, we all talk to each other. And so we were constantly challenging each other, asking for advice, running ideas by. I think a good rep is always thinking about something. A really good rep is always thinking about something. An average rep probably rethinks their strategy when they're told they should. So I think if you're going to be really proactive about this, it's probably worth looking at your process once a quarter. In an average, in a regular run-of-the-mill, even a successful rep who's got a very specified product that he or she sells to a very specified customer, they probably don't need to tweak that much, but it's just a matter of looking at, okay, what's going well, what's not going so well, right? People think that, and maybe this is my fault for the way I brand myself, just because you're rethinking your process doesn't mean it's a complete overhaul all the time. But it's like, do I know what I'm doing? Do I know where I'm heading? Is that a place that I want to go? And is what I'm doing right now going to help me get there? You can't sell really effectively on autopilot the whole time. But there are some times where you really need to really have some focus and some thought, and then you need to kind of disengage from that thought process while you go execute. Right. I mean, I knew this from playing baseball. You call it baseball in the UK, right? I'm not missing any words there.
We don't care about baseball in the UK. You can call it what you like.
All right. Okay. That's fine. We seem to care less and less about it here in the United States too. But I knew when I was standing at the plate, if I was overthinking, I could not let myself execute. Right. I'd sometimes be sure I knew what pitch was coming, but then I'd think about what pitch might be coming, and you only have less than a quarter of a second to even react, and so sometimes the overthinking actually gets in the way. So there is certainly a point in time where you need to commit to your process, commit to what you've decided is the right course of action. And you need to remove your brain to go execute. But if you're just executing for too long without stopping and thinking about whether or not that's the right way to execute anymore, you're leaving sales on the table.
For sure. And I guess some of this is lead time of kind of prospect to deal closed. If medical devices, if it takes a year for me to get a large deal done, I probably don't want to swap and change too much in the meantime, right? Because I might be confounding the variables that will lead to success. So there's other things that play into it. But quarterly, clearly, if we're going to sit down with sales management quarterly as well, a great opportunity to look at these things. Now, Jeff, you said that you are curious. You're interested. I'm the same. I will sit in data until my nose up against the screen, until everything's steamed up from my breath, and I will spend hours going through it. I find it really interesting and fascinating, and it is a weakness for me. I will procrastinate on actually, and we'll come to execution in a second. I will procrastinate on executing, not necessarily from planning, but from trying to get to the 1% of details that don't really matter. You get the 80% and execute, 80% execute. That's from kind of from having conversations with people like yourself, that seems to be the best strategy in most cases. Now, with that said, if someone is listening to this isn't curious and they're not interested in the minutiae of the sales process, and perhaps they love all elements of sales, that's why they're in the job, is there a process that they can put in place to rethink the sales process and their sales game? Is there a step-by-step that we can introduce to these people who don't naturally want to do this themselves?
When the pandemic really started to make itself apparent in spring of 2020, I felt for not just myself, but a lot of my clients and a lot of the B2B sellers that were out there. And particularly, and I know it was very similar in the United Kingdom, but there were operating rooms that weren't open. Right. There were operating rooms that turned into COVID wards. There were, the sales world that you and I kind of grew up in together was drastically different. And I had a lot of friends who were paid on 100% on commission. This may sound like a shock, but I've never known what a base salary looks like in sales. Right. There are a lot of people who weren't working, which meant they weren't making money, which meant that they weren't improving the lives of patients and things like that. So I thought about this process, and I sat down, I wrote a book, another little book, because I write the kind of books that I like to read. And, I called it Rethink the Way You Sell When It Goes Sideways, because this was an opportunity where so much information changed at the same time that you needed to take stock of what you had, you need to take stock of where you were going, and you need to think about the best way to get there. And I was having a back and forth actually with a friend of mine, and just on a social media platform. I think it was in the community that I created. And I said, Vince, you need to pause, assess, reflect, and then execute. And I looked down and I said, "Oh man, that's an acronym. I could do something with that." And I worked with that a little bit. And really, the book, I don't want to say it wrote itself because it didn't write itself, but it was one of these things where I had these ideas, and I write on a weekly basis for my audience. And it's not often that I can get that far ahead of myself. But I had like 4 or 5 topics that lined up. And I sat down and I said, wow, this could be maybe a little book. Maybe this could be something cool. And then a little book turned into like a medium-sized book that I could actually bind and publish. So the process is called PAIR. Pause, assess, reflect, execute. When everything goes sideways, when the world is spinning too fast, when you can't keep up with everything that's going on, the first thing you need to do is stop. Sometimes it means you need to remove yourself from that situation. Sometimes it's the end of the quarter and you just need to stop and look back. How'd it go? The end of the quarter, the end of the year, the end of the week sometimes. How'd it go? Where are we? Right? Where are we in terms of where we expected we'd be? Where are we in terms of where we want to be? And let's take that assessment and think about it. And now let's reflect on what our options are. Do we have our priorities straight? Are we acting on those priorities? Do we need to change our plan? Do we need to change our strategy? And then after you go through that process, it's up to you to execute. Now, here's the thing, and I don't know if you fall into this. I certainly fall into this. You get stopped, right? You get to a place where you can think, You assess your current situation. You think about a plan. You reflect on the options within that plan. And then you're so excited that you have a plan, that dopamine rush just floods your brain with all these neurochemicals, and you feel so good, you forget to pull the trigger and execute. Like the hardest part is the stop. And then the second hardest part is the execute part, right? So it pause, assess, reflect, and then execute. And that's, I think, something you can do a mini version of on a quarterly basis. Sometimes when there's a global pandemic, you need to pull all the stops, pull the brakes, shut down the assembly line, so to speak, and say, hold on. Are we where we need to be? Are we pointed in the direction that we want to go in? What are we going to do to get there? And then how do we make sure that we do? That's I think, a really applicable framework for anybody in any situation.
You might have said that flippantly. I just want to double down on this because this is how I feel. I find it's far harder to stop than it is to execute. You agreed?
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
I do. Because we're so used to acting, used to just doing,
And sales professionals were told to make more calls, do more emails, more activity. We're monitored on calls, emails, activity, deals closed. So to stop, and maybe this has been entrained into me by managers over time, I almost feel like I'm wasting time. There's probably a metaphor or an analogy to, I think there is one of, was it Isaac Newton? Someone said that if he had 7 days to do something, he would spend 6 days planning the best way of doing it. I'm clearly butchering all of that. But I find it really difficult to stop. And I know I've almost got this feedback loop as well of a lot of the success that I've had with the podcast product in sales itself and selling the product to teams. A lot of it has come from just being thick-headed and just doing the same things over and over and over again. Now, the issue with this is perhaps, and tell me if I'm right or wrong here, that you get a lot of survivor bias. So there might have been 10 people who started off doing things similar to me, and it's just been pure luck. It's not been strategy, that the things that I've been thick-headed about and done over and over and over have had success. Whereas other people putting the same amount of work, same amount of effort, and it just happens that they've not been on the right track from the beginning. So how do we know, with all that said, Jeff, how do we know when we should stop, and how do we know when we're stopping because of bad strategy, other than, I guess, missing target? I guess what I'm asking here is, in a long-winded way, how do we know when we should stop and just slightly realign versus how do we know when we should just carry on, get our heads down and try and go through the storm rather than around it?
There's so many things that you covered there that
I just throwed a lot at you.
I'll tell you what, if I were taking notes through that, I wouldn't have had time to write down all the things that popped into my head. So I'm just going to answer your question very directly first,
Sure.
And we'll see where it goes from there. I worked with a couple of clients through this past summer who were ready to stop and change direction, but didn't because I advised them not to. And the reason was they were still making progress. The progress wasn't happening fast enough, right? So, a lot of people had to change their business model. They had to go from an inbound only business model to an outbound business model. They had to, they'd never had to work like this before, and they didn't know what to expect. So they come up with an arbitrary sales cycle and say, I think in the next 90 days, we should have some new business closed. Where did the 90 days come from? Well, the same place your quota came from last week. Someone pulled it out of thin air and said, this sounds about right. And so when that 90 days comes and goes and they're not in the right direction, they think they need to uproot the whole thing and start over. Well, the clock resets at 0. You just threw away 90 days. And so what I had to remind them of, and this happened in a couple of different situations, I said, well, hold on, you're still making progress. You're still moving this forward. These deals haven't closed yet, but they haven't stalled. There's a difference. So what's really to blame for this? Well, the arbitrary finish line that you chose, maybe that was the wrong line. If we've stopped making progress, then let's change tactics. And you alluded to this before you asked this question. If we're still making progress, then let's keep going. If we're not making progress and we don't know which way is up and there's no momentum to kill, well, then let's go in a different direction. I think this bias toward action in this hesitancy, sometimes this hesitancy to change or to keep that same direction, they're kind of rooted in the same way. Everybody we see around us who is successful, this ties into your survivor bias, all we see is them acting. We don't see the thought process behind the actions. We don't see the strategy behind the actions. We don't see the luck sometimes behind actions. And what is a flaw of successful salespeople is they know what they did to go and be successful. In many cases, and this is why most sales reps don't end up being good managers, they don't know why what they did made them successful. They just say, I don't know, I just made 25 calls a day and then I did all this stuff kind of intuitively. We don't know sometimes what our own magic is, right? So we take for granted that thing. And when you just, if I were to say, look, I made 25 calls a day, well, you're my junior rep, I'm mentoring you, whatever, just make 25 calls a day. That doesn't really help you that much. And so what we see then gets translated as, well, just do more, just do more, just do more. There's only so much we can do. And then you get computers involved. And I tell people, look, tech helps you scale. It doesn't help you sell. You got to think about what you're trying to scale before you just try to sell to 1,000 people instead of one at a time. How many people do you know trying to send 100 emails at a time couldn't sell to one person standing in front of them who's already paying attention, right? Like we're scaling the wrong behaviors here. So you get to this bias toward action. And I don't know if I'm getting over this. This was my psychosis. Well, I don't know if this was yours. I always wanted to feel like when I was in the field, if my manager called me and said, what are you doing right now? That he'd be proud or she'd be proud of what I told him. And I wouldn't have to lie, right? So it's like, you don't want to be caught thinking. You want to be caught doing. You want to, you want, if someone were looking at me right now, would it look like I was doing something productive? So we put the cart before the horse there and we act before we think. We don't know that we're doing the right things. So look, I've said a lot of things. I've gone on all those various trains of thought there. Hopefully someone took something from that, but I think we need to have a clear understanding of why what works actually works. And we need to pretty regularly assess whether or not what we're doing is going to get us the results that we're looking to accomplish. If you don't do that at least once a quarter, you're not as efficient as you could be.
So I'm getting two things from this. One, we should be conscious of, I butcher this word every time I say it, but hedonic adaptation. Essentially, we earn 30 grand when we're 18. We're like, yeah, we've got loads of money. This is great. And then a few years later, it's not enough money to do the things that we want. So things have to go faster. We have to close more deals. We have to do more outreach. And as we do all of those things, they become potentially less effective because we're spending less effort on each individual outreach. And maybe there is a cadence, maybe there is a limit to what we can sell, how we can sell it. And that's then an organizational thing problem that we need to solve as opposed to as an individual, right? If we're hitting an appropriate quota and we're doing it in an appropriate way, we've probably won the game. We need to change the game perhaps to have further success. And the other thing I'm getting out of this is that, tell me if I'm wrong, this is just the basic scientific method. Have a hypothesis, head in one direction. If it works, great, carry on. If it doesn't work, or if there's a potential better opportunity, make another hypothesis and then go one way or the other. Is sales as simple as just A/B testing lots of small variables and then coming up with a strategy that works for a period of time and then redoing this every 6 months, 12 months, couple of years when cold email stops working, cold calls stop working, or these things become less efficient?
Isn't any process really that simple when you boil it down? Right? But what sells? Well, the people who are at the top of the mountain or are telling you that they're at the top of the mountain and they're showing you how much they do. And so the examples that we have are not necessarily telling you the whole story. That's the problem. That what's visible out there is not always worth modeling your own behavior after. The lessons that success can teach you, those lessons are worth learning, but that's different than just mirroring the behaviors. And that's where I think the thinking comes in, right? And that's where people just want to skip. I'm just going to go do what he's doing. I don't know, she's killing it. I'm just going to do whatever she's doing. Let's make sure we do that too. And there's no grounding in that. There's no, my podcast is the why and the buy. What is your why, right? If you don't have a good connection to why you're doing what you're doing, if you're just trying to emulate what else is out there, you're not going to have fulfillment, certainly. You're not going to even have a whole lot of success aside from maybe getting lucky, right? Now, if your target market looks exactly like them, listen, Burger King made a lot of money opening shops across the street from McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's fine. But what are you really trying to do, right? You can't, there aren't a lot of Me Too products out there that do really, really well. You've got to differentiate yourself a little bit. And that differentiation has to come from someplace meaningful. And you have to be connected to the whys before you can get, we say it on the show, when you know your why, your hows, and your whats get much better. Have some connection to why you're doing what you're doing, why it's the right thing to do. Think about those things, then go execute. But if you're just trying to copy, or if you're just acting for the sake of acting, if you're just picking up the phone and dialing for the sake of dialing, you send an email, same thing. If you're just on social media for the sake of being on social media, you're not really effective. I would argue that there are very few things you can do effectively if you're not at least engaged meaningfully in those activities. That's where our profession has kind of gone awry a little bit in that regard.
I would juxtapose that just slightly in that if you do copy something and it works, then definitely go all in on it, because that's an easy win, right?
Yeah. But can your strategy be, and I won't argue that, right? I mean, listen, like you said, it's worth A/B testing, yep. Right? Is sales a process that is just a bunch of micro A/B tests? Yeah, it can be if you want to think about it that granularly. So sure, if it's working, go right ahead and do it. But we're just going to do what everybody else does as a strategy on the whole. I don't know of a company that's done that very well.
Sure. And just to juxtapose against my own point, you can't A/B test being passionate about your product or your customer, because it's binary, right? You either do give a shit or you don't give a shit. It's not something that you can just layer on and test to see if that's going to move the needle or not.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, it's your show. You can juxtapose anything you want. You go right ahead.
The problem is I'm agreeing with everything that you're saying. And so the audience are going to go, yeah, we all agree. And then we all end up with this, we're all just nodding ahead and agreeing. I'm trying to give some just, devil's advocate slightly where I can. Right. With that, Jeff, I'm conscious of time. Is there anything that we need to really think about from an execution standpoint? Is there any other kind of frameworks or anything that we could put in place if we are struggling, if we've done the other steps and we're struggling to then just pull the trigger and start moving forward?
You mentioned the closed-mindedness earlier of a lot of reps. I've been cold calling for 20 years. I'm going to keep cold calling. I'm going to, the phone doesn't work for my clients, so I'm not going to, use the phone. Cold calling is dead. Long live cold calling, right? I think what we need to do is divorce ourselves from the specific activity that we're engaging in, and we need to think about what we're trying to accomplish, right? Don't worry about how to do the job before you worry about what needs to be done. Cold calling may work for you. Maybe it doesn't. Emailing may work for you. Maybe it doesn't. Social media doesn't work for you. Maybe it does. What will never die? Prospecting. The method du jour, knock yourself out. Go right ahead. Try them all. But if you think that you can't, or if you think that you don't have to, rather, put yourself in front of people who don't know that you have a solution to their problem, you're wrong. That's the tweet, right? Like, you are wrong if you don't believe that in order to grow your business, that you don't need to put yourself in front of people that you can help. It has to happen in some ways. Sometimes you're fortunate enough that they're going to find you because they're looking for you. But you need to be someone worth talking to with something worth talking about in order to be successful in this game. If you want to send it by smoke signal or carrier pigeon, go right ahead if that's going to work for you. Maybe that's worth A/B testing for somebody. But don't be so engaged and so married to the specific method that you forget the job that you're trying to do. So that's the tactical piece of advice there, I think.
That makes total sense. Well, I've got one final question for you. You've been on the show a bunch of times now, Jeff, and so I'm going to redo this kind of live as I ponder on it, because I don't want to ask you the same question again. So if you could go back in time, clearly we can't, but if we could go back in time and speak to yourself 2 weeks before the world went ape shit with COVID, what advice would you give yourself in that moment?
Ape shit is an underutilized term. I really like that one. It has so much impact because it gets pulled out so infrequently.
I like to visualize it. I literally imagine an ape going absolutely mental.
So 2 weeks before the pandemic hit, what would I do? The first two times I was on this show, I remember the advice to my younger self was trust your instincts, trust your intuitions. They're good. Keep moving forward. That is very similar advice that I give myself today. But let me think. Buy toilet paper has probably already been taken.
Buy shares in Amazon, drugs companies.
Yeah. 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 Okay. So no investment tips. No. It's get outside a lot. And actually, no. I'll tell you. This will be a little bit more personal. Be really. I think I did a pretty good job of this, but the importance of being really compassionate with the people around you. The importance of don't rush to judge people and their decisions or their reactions to what might happen over the next 6 or 7 months, because it's going to get crazy. And you may notice that your own feelings change as you go through this as well. So don't rush to judge. Everybody's got their own story. Your story will change and grow through this as well. And make sure you take time to learn the lessons that this struggle is trying to teach you. You try to ignore the hardship, you won't learn the lesson. Steel sharpens steel. Friction is intended to polish. Make sure you take advantage of this situation to be better on the other side of it.
I love it. I bet you there is a huge chunk of people listening to this, rightly or wrongly, who haven't taken a moment just to ponder on what has been, what could have been, what they wanted to happen. And there's definitely, whoever's listening, there's definitely a few things to learn there, right?
It was my biggest fear toward the end of the summer was that this whole thing was going to come and go and I wasn't going to be better for it. That I was going to ignore it. I was going to numb myself through it. I mean, how many virtual happy hours were there in March, April, and May? And it's like, man, how long can I can't drink like this. I'm not a young man anymore. I can't drink like this to this extent. And but I remember thinking, look, what are you going to do, Jeff, to be better for this on the other side? And I had to do my own pair process. Well, and if you're listening right now and you haven't stopped to think about how you've come through this. Look, the lessons are still there to be learned if you can put yourself in that mind frame. If you can, understand what we've gone through, what we're still going through. We're still only barely more than halfway through this as a global community. Mm-hmm. What can you do to be better on the other side? What lesson has this taught you about being present or about your relationships? Are they really good or are they really not so solid? Are you willing to grow, or are you just trying to ignore the stuff that's uncomfortable? For me, selling has always been a reflection of the lessons that I've learned to be a better human being. And this is certainly no different.
For sure. And for Gail, if you listen to a podcast about sales right now, as we go and launch into 2021, you've survived. Whether you have, even if financially you've taken a hit or you've had illness in the family and stuff, you personally, if you're now listening to this, because you wouldn't listen to a sales podcast unless your career and your job and your future from that perspective was a priority for yourself. So you've done great. Just being here at this moment and listening to this. I really humbling hearing you say that then, Jeff, as I'm sat here listening, having a little bit of a humbling moment to myself, because we have survived, and that's all you can do at a certain point, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes that's enough. Mm-hmm. We don't give ourselves enough credit for that, I think.
Good man. Right. Well, with that, tell us a little. We've touched on it, but tell us a little bit more about the book and where we can find you, especially anything live that you're doing as well.
Awesome. Thank you. JeffBajorek.com. That's my website. That's the hub. That's getting a facelift here this winter. So by the time you listen to this, it might look a little different than it does, right now as we're recording. The book's on Amazon. Rethink the Way You Sell When It Goes Sideways. Really, it's available on Kindle. It's available in paperback form. It's also available on Audible. So I've got you surrounded in the Amazon ecosystem. It's a little book. Look, I think the Audible version's $3 American. So I mean, it's not meant to be a huge investment on your part. It's meant to be a lesson that is worth learning in a brief kind of format. And if you really want to, you can go to my website. You give me your email address, I'll give you the PDF for free. That's how it works. You don't make money selling books, so that was never a concern for me. And I've got another podcast that I started in the fall. It's called Deeper Thought. You can go to deeperthoughtpodcast.com. That's an annual subscription. It's $100 a year. It is my very best work. I've got some contributors that are helping me with that. And there are conversations you can have, places you can go behind closed doors that you can't in public. And that is, it's literally my very best work, and it continues to evolve. It's 3-4 episodes. Well, it's 2 to 4 episodes a week. Over the holidays, it was just 2, but it's typically 3 episodes a week. They're brief, and we're having a lot of fun with it. So that's worth checking out.
Amazing stuff. Well, I'll link to all of that in the show notes over at salesman.org. And then with that, Jeff, we covered a lot of ground here, mate, and I appreciate that. I can just dump questions on you that I'm interested in, and you can always throw back an answer. I appreciate that. And with that, I want to thank you again for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Always good to talk to you, Will. Thank you.